Richard, always the man of surprises.
Sophia, you look prepared.
Prepared for what exactly? You've been mysterious all week.
For this, my black card. No limits, no restrictions.
So it's true. You do know how to tempt a woman.
It isn't temptation, Sophia. It's a test. What you do with it will tell me everything.
Then watch me, Richard. Watch closely.
James, kindly send Diana in.
Right away, sir.
Once upon a time, in Lamina, there lived Richard Ease. People knew the skyscraper before they knew the man. A tower of glass and marble that mirrored the city's neon billboards and swallowed its car horns like tides. Inside, the floors were cool as rain and the air smelled faintly of Polish and expensive cologne. Guards at the gates moved like clock hands. Chandeliers hummed with quiet electricity. The dining hall was so wide a whisper had to travel. People thought Richard had everything. They didn't know he was empty. But that life was about to change. He stood alone by the south wall where the glass reached from floor to heaven, the city vibrating in miniature at his feet. On his wrist, a black watch ticked with an almost scolding patience. On the long dining table, 3 mat cards lay side by side like silent verdicts. His mother's proverb visited the room the way scents do, the way memories do, uninvited and unavoidable. Gold shines, but a good wife builds a foundation. Richard touched the first card with a forefinger and saw, for a private blink, the long road that had tricked him. Founders' dinners where every laugh had a price tag, birthdays where the candles melted into contracts, kisses that landed like signatures. He thought of Sophia's halo of cameras, Diana's eyes that counted doors, Miriam's footsteps that never echoed because she never allowed them to. 3 women orbiting the same sun, each reflecting something the light wasn't. He called for the butler, and the room obeyed. "Send for Ms. Adeyemi," he said. His voice didn't need to rise, the marble carried it for him. Sophia arrived in a cloud of soft laughter, her heels tapping quick declarations across the floor. The chandelier admired her dress and applauded with light. "Richie," she sang, kissing the air beside his cheek. "You disappeared on me. Don't tell me you've fallen in love with spreadsheets again." "Sit," he said gently, and he gestured toward the head of the table as if offering a throne. A guard at the distant door pretended to stop breathing. He lifted one black card between 2 fingers, and for a second the room seemed to shrink to the size of that gesture. 3 days, Richard said. "No rules. Do whatever you want." Sophia's smile learned a new language. "Are you serious?" "I am." She held the card like a mirror and admired herself in its refusal to reflect. "You're going to love me for this," she laughed, and the perfume she wore grew confident. "We should celebrate. Dinner? No, La Vienne's rooftop. I'll book the private booth." "Do what you like," he said, a phrase that felt like both generosity and experiment. When she swept out, the scent of her ambition stayed behind like a ribbon on a chair. "Send for Ms. Johnson," Richard said. Diana came dressed in the day's efficiency, a tailored navy suit that made the chandeliers behave. Her tablet slept under her arm, but information seemed to hover around her like a trained pet. "You cleared your afternoon," she said, measuring his face with the concern of a physician. "Is the Shanghai board call moved or dead?" "Moved," he replied, "for something simpler." He placed the second card on the table and slid it halfway toward her. 3 days. No rules. Diana didn't touch it at first. Her eyes were swift geometry, angles measuring motive and outcome. "For performance." "For truth," he said. Her smile was small and almost tender. "Then I'll spend it wisely." He watched her leave and wondered if wisdom could be purchased at mixers and on rooftops where conversations cost more than champagne. The door closed with a hush that sounded like a promise to be kept privately. He didn't call for Miriam. He went to find her. The mansion knew how to receive visitors and how to hide the people who served them. Richard passed the echoing corridor where the portraits of ancestors peered down in gilded judgment, crossed the threshold where the marble yielded to softer tile, and followed the faint sound of running water. In the service kitchen, steam rose from a pot, and the air smelled of onions and something careful. Miriam, hair folded into a scarf, sleeves rolled to her elbow, lifted a kettle and poured with the attention a surgeon might reserve for a pulse. She didn't startle when he entered. She grew still, like an instrument set down. "Good evening, sir." "Evening, Miriam." He cleared his throat, annoyed at how formal the air insisted on becoming in her presence, as if the house itself demanded titles. "I have something for you." Her eyes flicked from his face to the black card he held. Not hunger, not even curiosity. A question set its suitcase down in her gaze. "For me." "For 3 days," he said. "No rules." Her first instinct was a refusal. He saw the shape of it in her shoulders. "Sir, I have what I need." She said it without pride, without rehearsed humility, almost apologetically, as if the thought of wanting more was a stain she tried to keep off her apron. "This isn't about need," Richard said. It's a gift." She didn't take it. He placed it on the counter between a clean bowl and a folded towel. The card looked wrong there, like a night bird asleep at noon. "All right," Miriam whispered. "Thank you." Then, quietly, "Please, what should I buy?" "Whatever your heart would," he said, borrowing courage from the proverb that had been shadowing him. "No rules." She nodded. He turned to leave and then paused, arrested by a small domestic detail. A single lily stem in a jar near the window, its white opening new in the afternoon light. He looked at it the way thirsty men look at rain. "Beautiful," he murmured. "It was on sale," she said, and her small smile was an apology for the extravagance of a flower. Back in the great hall, the house put its armor back on him. Marble cool underfoot, a measured hush, the distant click of a guard's radio swallowed by velvet drapes. He stood again at the glass and watched Lamina strobe with evening. Billboards preaching luxury in a dozen fonts, SUVs gliding like ink, the river turning gold where it slipped past the bridge. He checked his watch and hated the impulse. Time had begun to feel like a stakeholder he had to report to. "Sir." The voice belonged to James, head of security, present without sound beside the doorway. "Per your instruction, the cards are activated. We can monitor transactions in real time. Discreetly." "Discreetly," Richard repeated. The word tasted clinical. "No invasions." "Just receipts, locations, timestamps," James said. "No private spaces. No microphones." Richard nodded. The architecture of the choice made him briefly dizzy. He was a man who trusted data because it did not flirt or lie. But data could be cruel in its neutrality. It told you what happened without telling you why. He wandered to the dining hall and considered the stage he had built. The table could seat 20. Tonight the silver would sit like moonlight in the dark. The chandelier would practice sincerity. Wine would breathe. The room would act like a witness who pretended not to be there. He pictured the 3 women filling the chairs he had mentally rehearsed for them. Sophia in a color that asked cameras to obey. Diana in a cut that promised she'd never be surprised by a question. Miriam in something that wanted to be invisible but would fail at it because she was the kind of person the eye returned to even when the mind was busy. He heard his mother again. Not the words this time, but the way she had once touched the edge of a plate to check for heat before passing it to him. The way her fingers had forgiven the world's roughness without ever agreeing to it. Foundation. He had built tall. He had built clever. He had not built deep. On the sideboard, a decanter caught him leaning and turned him into amber. He poured a measure and set it down untouched, like a bribe he intended to refuse. The mansion ticked. In the kitchen corridor, someone's laughter fluttered and died. Outside the glass, Lamina unscrolled its evening news in lights. Sophia's first ping came like a pebble in a lake. Gilded Swan Boutique, 3.2 million naira. The phone on the table displayed it without guilt. Then came the second ripple. La VN Rooftop, table reservation, 1.1 million, 150,000 naira. Then the jewelry store. The yacht club inquiry. The driver service upgrade to platinum. Diana's notifications were calmer, like a surgeon's notes. Elements Wellness Spa, 250,000 naira. Atelier Fittings, 480,000 naira. Summit Circle Mixer, RSVP confirmed. And then a quiet entry, almost a whisper. Neighborhood Grocer, 38,400 naira. He didn't expect the sting in his chest at that last one. As if a small bell had rung, in a chapel, he had forgotten he carried. He silenced the phone, ashamed of wanting to know and unwilling not to know. 3 days, he told the room, and the chandelier nodded like a judge who had already decided a case. At dinner, he ate alone. The cutlery was tender and precise, the napkin patient on his knee, the soup as composed as a well-behaved child. The wine uncorked with the sound of a secret learning to breathe. It was a performance that failed because it had nowhere to land. He left the table early and walked the perimeter of the glass like a sentry. The city lifted its shoulders and exhaled. A helicopter painted a brief blade of light across the river. Somewhere, a door closed in his house and a different future opened. Before sleep he found the service corridor again, drawn by the lily he hadn't meant to remember. The kitchen was clean as prayer. On the counter, the black card was gone. In its place, a folded note with handwriting that bent modestly toward every line. "Thank you, sir. I will be careful." He stood listening to the mansion breathe, air moving in ducts like thought, the minute pulse of electricity in the walls, the distant tread of a guard passing a threshold. He removed his watch and set it beside the note. The ticking didn't stop. It became the house's heartbeat. He switched off the light and let the darkness collect around the lily until its white became a moon. By morning, the gates prepared themselves for more important cars. The guards polished their boots a little brighter. The fountain rehearsed its argument for wealth. Richard shaved as if he were answering a question. When he looked in the mirror, he saw a man whose face the city recognized, but whose eyes belonged to a stranger who had been living in his house longer than he had. He took his coffee in the dining hall and tasted nothing but the porcelain's heat. "Update?" he asked without turning. James recited numbers that were also narratives. Sophia's purchases were beginning to wear the shape of a party. Diana's calendar had acquired rooms where his name would be used as furniture. Miriam's trail drew a map that looked like a neighborhood, not a brand. 3 days, Richard said again. But now the phrase sounded less like a countdown and more like a prayer. He returned to the glass and let the city speak in horns and distance. Somewhere below, roasted peppers would be stirring in small kitchens. He could not enter without changing the temperature of the room. He touched the window and made a fingerprint the cleaners would remove before noon. The mansion, which had never loved him except in the way obedient things love their use, seemed to wait with him. The marble held his reflection without offering advice. The chandelier dimmed as the sun climbed, like a star learning humility. In the quiet, he remembered his mother's other sentence. One she had said while shelling beans with neighbors at a plastic table that wobbled. The roof doesn't thank the wall out loud, but it still stands because of it. He smiled at nothing. He did not yet know that roofs can also be remade, that walls can become doors, that a house can relearn how to introduce itself. For now there was only glass, a watch, 3 cards, and the strange relief of not yet knowing who anyone truly was. The boutique windows of Lamina glittered like altars that night, each mannequin a prophet of hunger and shine. Sophia Adeyemi swept down the boulevard with her friends orbiting like planets, heels clicking on rain-washed pavement. Car horns hummed low, roasted corn smoke tangled with imported perfume, and neon lights painted their laughter with restless color. In her hand gleamed the black card, raised occasionally for the camera flash of her phone like a scepter she had just seized. "Queen Sophia," one of her friends shouted, adjusting a silk scarf. "Buy the whole street, why not?" "Maybe I will," Sophia answered, tossing her hair so the golden highlights rippled in the lamplight. Her eyes sparkled with the fever of someone who believed a night could last forever. Inside La Vienne's rooftop lounge, the air was thick with saffron, champagne bubbles, and music that leaned against the skyline. Sophia ordered bottles without asking the price. She leaned across the table, whispering loud enough for the servers to hear. "Do you know who I am? Richard's woman. We don't count bills, we make them." The waitstaff bowed in patience while her phone filmed every pore. The city fed on the performance. Her videos hit Lumina's trending feed before the champagne had settled. Comments scrolled, "Goddess of Lumina, living the dream, that card though." Not one message went to Richard. The next morning, Sophia emerged in a gown so green it rivaled the palms on Lumina's main avenue. Bags circled her wrists like chains of gold, and she mocked a street hawker whose raffia basket brushed her elbow. "Watch where you're going. This fabric costs more than your stall," she snapped. Her friends laughed, and the hawker lowered her gaze. Cameras caught everything. At a yacht club, Sophia swiped the card again, tossing her head as if daring the water to applaud. She posed on the deck for photos, her stiletto heel sinking slightly into the wooden planks. The sea lapped, disinterested but patient. "Richard will thank me for this," she said into her phone. "Lumina will know we are royalty." But when night fell and the neon of Lumina sang its restless lullabies, her phone screen glowed only with likes and comments. Richard's silence weighed heavier than the diamond she had pressed against her skin. Still, Sophia did not call. She whispered to herself, voice thick with laughter she almost believed, "Let him see me shine." And Lumina watched as she spiraled further into a kingdom she thought was hers to command. Lumina's skyline pulsed that evening with its 1,000 ambitions. From the penthouse view, Diana Johnson adjusted her suit jacket, tablet tucked close like an ally. She was no stranger to glass towers and boardrooms, but tonight she felt the card in her purse like a passport into a country she had always been denied. At Elements Wellness Spa, the scent of eucalyptus curled through the air while fountains whispered serenity. Diana lay still, cucumber slices cooling her eyes, and thought not of relaxation but of optics. By morning, her skin would speak of leisure, strategic leisure, the kind that whispered power. She rose renewed, slipped into a fitted dress, and called the driver to the atelier. In the boutique, the sales assistant draped her in silk and navy, heels clicking across marble floors. "Perfect for the summit circle," Diana murmured, brushing her hair sleek as armor. She slid the card across the counter without hesitation, her lips curving into a smile as polished as the glass around her. The Summit Circle mixer roared with pulsing music and the chime of champagne flutes. Clusters of men in designer suits leaned close, their words a currency. Diana threaded through them, her heels marking authority on the floor, eyes sharp with calculation. "Diana Johnson," she said, extending her hand with practiced warmth. "I work closely with Richard Ease." She let the pause breathe. "Some call me his partner." Heads nodded. Glasses clinked. Her words folded into the air like seeds onto fertile soil. Behind her, whispers began. "Who is she? Is she the shadow strategist?" She laughed lightly, knowing how to leave questions unanswered. For every champagne bubble that burst, her image inflated. When a man asked about Richard's expansion plans, she leaned in with the patience of someone who had memorized blueprints. "Richard sees the future. I make sure it arrives on time." Her phone buzzed. A notification confirmed another transaction. Summit Circle RSVP, paid. She smiled at the screen as if it had just called her queen. In the restroom mirror, she studied herself. The diamond stud she had purchased winked back, but it wasn't jewelry she admired. It was the reflection of a woman finally rewriting her name. 3 days, she whispered to her reflection, voice low and fierce. 3 days to become what he never dared to call me. The city outside pulsed with promise. In the mixer's shifting lights, Diana Johnson was no longer an assistant. She was an equal in waiting, or a rival in bloom. The mansion's service corridor smelled faintly of onions and clean soap, a humble fragrance that followed Miriam Daniels wherever she walked. She held the black card like a hot coal, certain it would scorch her if she gripped too tightly. 3 days, he had said. No rules. But rules lived in her marrow, the rules of hunger, of making do, of stretching one yam to feed 6 mouths. That evening, she walked to the neighborhood grocer beneath a flickering fluorescent bulb. The grocer's stall leaned tiredly against peeling paint, raffia baskets spilling beans, tomatoes glistening with the day's last mist. "Miriam?" the grocer asked, startled. She never bought in bulk. Yet she pressed the card down, whispering, "Yams and beans. Enough for 5 families." The grocer's hands trembled at the shimmer of the card. A boy lugged sacks onto a handcart, and Miriam carried smaller bundles herself, ignoring the stain it left on her wrapper. The air smelled of dust, pepper, and rain-soaked earth. Children ran barefoot around her, clapping as if she had arrived with magic. On the second day, she stood at the rusting gate of an orphanage. Its walls flaked like tired skin, and the sound of children reciting lessons cracked like dry sticks. Inside, rows of little ones sat on benches, some with torn sandals, some with none at all. Miriam placed new notebooks on their desks, pencils sharpened like hope. She pressed a receipt into the matron's palm. School supplies, paid in full. The matron's eyes filled, words stumbling, "God will," but Miriam cut her short gently. No need. Just let them learn. Later, in the hospital corridor smelling of disinfectant and weary bodies, she found a widow hunched over a bill. The woman clutched her chest as though the paper had become a blade. Miriam slipped the card across the counter, settling the balance. The widow's voice cracked like dry clay. "Who are you?" Miriam smiled faintly, eyes lowered. "No one important." That night, in her small quarters, Miriam unwrapped a single bouquet of lilies she had dared to buy. Their pale petals opened softly in a chipped vase, a luxury she could almost not forgive herself for. She sat by the lamp's dull glow, the scent of the lilies mingling with soap and the faint echo of laughter from the mansion above. On the third day, she walked the market, handing out steaming bowls of yam porridge to beggars who slept by the gutter. The porridge smelled of palm oil and home, and her hands, scarred from years of scrubbing, ladled it without pause. One old man whispered a blessing into her wrist. Miriam only nodded, tears hot on her face. She returned to her room with nothing but tired arms and the card tucked away. It looked no different, though she felt its weight had shifted, lighter, as if truth weighed less than vanity. She touched the lilies once more before bed, whispering, "I hope this is enough." In the silence, the mansion ticked, waiting for judgment. The dining hall was a cathedral of silence that evening. Chandeliers dripped light like molten gold, polished marble reflected every movement, and the long table stretched wider than most families' compounds. 3 place settings gleamed with silverware that had never tasted hunger. Richard Ease stood at the head, his watch ticking louder than the fountain outside. The women arrived in sequence, like characters summoned by fate. Sophia swept in first, perfume announcing her, emerald dress whispering arrogance against the marble. "Darling," she cooed, tossing her clutch onto the table. "We must talk about my yacht party." She slid into her seat as if she owned it. Diana followed, posture upright, navy suit sharp as a blade. She carried her tablet, though she would not open it, a silent reminder of her discipline. "Richard," she said crisply, nodding as if she had just left a board meeting on his behalf. Miriam entered last. Her wrapper was plain, her sandals worn, but the lilies from her room peeked shyly from her hand, brought without calculation. She set them quietly in a glass by her plate. The fragrance filled the silence. Richard did not eat. He lifted a folder, its leather creaking, and spread receipts across the table like a prophet casting lots. "Here," he said, voice steady. "Your hearts, printed in ink." Sophia's receipts screamed indulgence. Yacht club charges, champagne lunches, boutiques at midnight. She leaned forward, indignation blazing. "You spied on me, you sick man, testing me like a servant." Her chair screeched as she rose, bracelets clattering. "Keep your card, and your paranoia." She stormed out, perfume sour in her absence. Diana's column was neat, precise, spa, atelier, mixers with power brokers. She raised her chin. "Ambition isn't betrayal, Richard. I don't apologize for wanting more. If you prefer Cinderella stories, marry a fairy tale." She gathered her tablet like a weapon and walked out, heels tapping like a gavel. Miriam's list was the quietest. Grocer, hospital, orphanage, lilies. Her fingers twisted in her lap. "I thought, I only did what I could. I know it is not enough." Richard's throat tightened. He touched the page gently. "Miriam, you are the only one who gave without performance." His words fell heavy, shaking the marble, cracking the echo of wealth. Miriam's eyes widened. She whispered, "But I am only a maid." "And yet," Richard said softly, "you remembered what it means to build." The chandelier flickered as if it understood. In that hall of emptiness, truth had spoken, but outside, storms were already gathering. Lamina woke mean the next morning. Headlines screamed from curbside kiosks and phone screens glowed with poison before breakfast. A tabloid banner bellowed across the city like a trumpet blown out of tune. Billionaire manipulates women in sick black card experiment. Beneath it, a photo of Sophia in a red dress, chin lifted, eyes wet, froze her mid-confession. Cameras had kissed her tear line into a pearl. She held a tissue as if holding truth itself. Microphones jutted like spears. "He used us," Sophia said, voice rounded by outrage and performance. "He wanted to humiliate women to see which one was worthy." Flashbulbs detonated. A reporter asked if marriage had been promised. Sophia's lashes fluttered. "We discussed a future," she said, which was not the same as yes and was precisely enough. "But how can there be trust with a man who spies?" The crowd hissed, eager for a villain. Outside Richard's gates, a different weather gathered. Paparazzi camped by the wrought iron, engines idling, lenses hunting for reflections in the glass. The air smelled of exhaust and wet grass. Guards repeated, "No comment," until the phrase leaked heat. On the hour, new clips surfaced. Sophia laughing on a yacht, now folded into a testimony of pain. Sophia clinking champagne, now captioned controlled and gaslit. The city's appetite sharpened. By noon, Diana stepped onto the courthouse steps in a navy power blazer that fit like a verdict. Reporters gasped as if a queen had descended. She carried a leather folder and a mouth trained on precision. "I am filing a suit," she said, voice amplified by a forest of microphones. "Breach of trust. Inducement under false pretenses. Workplace manipulation." Papers flashed, stamped, initialed, performatively thick. "We cannot normalize powerful men running social experiments on women's dignity. We will see him in court." A dozen phones caught every breath. One journalist shouted, "Were you his partner?" Diana's smile tilted. "I did the work of a partner without the title," she said, letting the sentence laze in the sun like a crocodile. "And while some were busy filming rooftop parties, I was carrying his empire on my back." The jab struck two targets at once. The crowd cackled like hens at a morning spill of corn. The scandal atmosphere thickened. Flashing cameras, tabloid mock-ups slapped on street kiosks, angry relatives' voices rising like harmattan dust. Clips of Richard stepping from SUVs now played under thunderous fonts. Who is the real EZE? The rhythm of the city changed. Hawkers hawked the story with peppered relish. Taxi radios chewed it into talk show meat. Church WhatsApp groups lifted prayer chains and private "I told you so's." By late afternoon, a convoy of black SUVs glided into a compound whose gates knew his grandfather's name better than his own. The family council hall did not do small emotions. Carved wooden chairs arranged in a half-circle waited like a tribunal. Ancestral portraits watched with oil-painted patience. Elders in agbadas the color of dry soil and rainfall adjusted caps with practiced authority. Outside, a pot smoked with firewood, the scent of char and palm oil mixing with a bitter tang of kola nut inside. Richard walked in, and the hall rearranged itself around him, then refused to bend. His uncles, Jonah and Azabwyk, sat at the center like twin hills. Aunties flanked them, Jeel head wraps blooming like disciplined gardens. A wooden bowl with kola nuts sat on a low table. Nobody broke it. "Sit," Uncle Jonah said, voice gravelly with the weight of other men's mistakes. "We have been disgraced in the market square." Richard took a chair that did not look like his watch ticked with traitorous volume. "With respect," he began, but Uncle Azabwyk lifted a palm. "How can the E's name survive?" Azabwyk asked quietly, which was worse than shouting, "when our nephew conducts." His tongue seemed to search for a word that could carry contempt without spilling it. "Laboratory trials on women." Murmurs. A cousin coughed into a fist to hide a laugh that was not a laugh. An auntie shook her head, bracelets clinking like cautious rain. "It was not a trial," Richard said, skin heating. "I asked for truth." "You asked for scandal," an elder aunt replied. eyes sharp with generations. And you fed it with your own spoon. Uncle Jonah leaned forward until his necklace of red beads touched the edge of judgment. We hear you plan to marry a maid. Her name is Miriam, Richard said, and the syllables steadied him. And she is the kind of woman who remembers the foundation when everyone is polishing the gold. If you marry her, Azabwyk said, tasting each word, the family banks will revisit our contracts. You know the weight of that sentence. Silence bordered the room and sealed its door. Richard pictured, uninvited, the orphanage peeling paint and the way Miriam's hands had looked when she ladled porridge into a bowl. Competent, unphotographed, true. Uncle Jonah broke a kola nut at last, the crack like a knuckle rapped on heaven's door. He passed a piece to Richard with a face that remembered childhood debts. We did not build this name with brooms, he whispered. We built it with walls. Bring us a woman who knows how to stand beside a wall, not scrub it. Richard set the kola aside. The roof does not thank the wall out loud, he said, voice low, but it still stands because of it. A few elders harumphed. The proverb cut both ways. He stood. If this council rejects a woman who builds, then it rejects me. And a name that rejects its foundation becomes a signboard without a house. Gasps swelled, Jeel swished, someone whispered Chukwu. The auntie's bracelets stopped their small reign. Uncle Azabwyk's eyes sharpened to pins. Think carefully, Richard. I have, he said, and left the kola nut untouched on the table like a red punctuation mark. Outside, as he reached the courtyard, he heard a radio drifting gossip past the firewood smoke. Breaking, former assistant Diana Johnson releases documents alleging Maid's criminal past. The words arrived like a slap. By evening, the mansion gates were a theater. Reporters shouted questions that tried to plant themselves in his chest. Is Miriam a con artist? Did you promise Sophia marriage? Are you hiding? The camera flashes were a white storm. Even the fountain's steady argument for wealth sounded defensive. James and the guards formed a human wall in black suits, palms open, voices even. Please step back. Please step back. Richard's phone pulsed with messages. Board members requesting distance, lawyers requesting calm, sponsors requesting invisibility until the rain cleared. The house swallowed him and presented another trial. His own reflection in the glass multiplied into a chorus of men who all looked like him and none of them did. Across the city, Miriam tried to buy tomatoes and leave quickly. It was market day, and the smell should have been kind. Pepper heat, fried plantain, damp raffia, but the air had soured. A cluster of women near the pepper stall raised their phones as if warding off evil. One, face lacquered with gossip, hissed, "So it is you. Gold digger in uniform." Laughter, sharp and unseasoned, cut the aisle. Another woman blocked her with a basket hip. "Teach us how you trapped him, N. We too want to scrub our way into a mansion." Miriam's hands tightened on the basket handle until the pink of her knuckles ghosted through brown. "Excuse me, please," she whispered. Her eyes found a child tugging his mother's wrapper, palm open for a slice of mango. She offered him her spot in line. The mother took it without thanks, because the world was teaching its children bad arithmetic that day. By the time she reached her street, two men leaned near her door, the glow of a phone screen lanterning their jeers. "Smile for the camera, Madam Foundation," one said. "Where is your black card?" The other barked a laugh and filmed her keys trembling against the lock. She slipped inside and leaned against the door until Wood knew the shape of her shoulder blades. The room smelled like lilies and detergent. On the small table lay the note she had written but not yet given. "Your world will never accept me. Do not destroy yourself for my sake." She folded it again, and again, until it was a hard small thing like a pebble a child might skip across a river. She placed it in an envelope, addressed it with the care of a nurse labeling medicine, then sat with her head in her hands. Outside, a siren escalated then forgot to arrive. The lilies opened wider, oblivious to scandal's appetite. At the courthouse, Diana's second press appearance bloomed like a poisonous flower. She stood behind a podium this time, flanked by two lawyers in conservative suits and a woman from a rival firm who smirked with her eyes alone. "We have been contacted by sources," Diana announced, who provided documentation suggesting that Ms. Miriam Daniels used false identities to secure employment. She held up photocopies that cameras gratefully flattened into facts. Names half redacted, stamps half visible, the kind of papers that smell of toner and ambition. A reporter, braver than the rest or simply hungrier, cried, "Where are the originals?" Diana's smile did not move. In safe custody, she lied like a person who believed good lies could be collateral. Another voice, "Is this personal, Ms. Johnson?" She tilted her head like a judge entertaining an objection. "This is professional. But if power protects itself with experiments, then we must protect women with truth." Sophia appeared late, sunglasses swallowing whatever guilt might have survived. She clasped Diana's fingers at the podium and leaned into microphones that smelled faintly of breath and newsprint. "He told me I was the one," she said, inventing a sentence that would work even if it wasn't true. Camera shutters ratcheted. The city swallowed it whole. In the mansion, James brought tea and bad news. "Sir, we advise no comment until council clears a statement. Also, family representatives request another meeting tomorrow. They said non-negotiable." The tea steamed with a hospital's mercy. Richard did not drink it. "Where is Miriam?" he asked. "Home," James said. "Two of our men are nearby. She asked them not to follow too closely." James hesitated, then added quietly, "She looked brave." Brave. The word put a crack through Richard's chest in a shape that might have been hope or pain. He walked to the glass again. The city wore its scandal like carnival beads, unnecessary and everywhere. He pressed his palm to the window as if checking for a pulse. The mansion reflected him but offered no translation. Night came with its brief promise of privacy. It lied. A drone buzzed past the third-floor balcony, inquisitive as a mosquito, before a guard swatted it with authority. The fountain kept speaking, but the language of water could not break news cycles. In a corner room, the old portraits looked younger in the dark, as if they had just been painted and were still deciding whether they approved of their descendants. His phone blinked, from unknown. A video grainy with malice. Miriam at the market, head bowed, voices harrying, "Gold digger." The caption, "This is the woman he chose." The comments under it were bonfire in dry season. Richard closed his eyes until the screen was a phantom. He saw instead a service kitchen, steam rising like prayer, a lily in a jar pretending to be a moon. His mother's proverb returned, stubborn, faithful, gold shines, but a good wife builds a foundation. He wondered how many storms a foundation could take before it learned to enjoy thunder. He did not sleep. The mansion hummed with its own insomnia. Somewhere near dawn, when Scandal's voice finally rasped into a whisper, he stood in the corridor that led from wealth to work, from gallery to kitchen, from glass to tile. The air there smelled less expensive and more human. On a small hook hung an apron someone had forgotten to retrieve. He touched it like an artifact. "Sir." James's voice softened with caution. "The city is waiting. What shall we do?" Richard looked at the door that led to the world and the door that led to the rooms where meals were made and hands were washed and names were not printed on walls. "We will not hide," he said. "Open the gates." James blinked. "To whom?" "To Lamina," Richard answered. "To the people Scandal pretends not to see." He exhaled, and the breath felt like a decision made by a younger man he had almost forgotten. If they want a spectacle, let it be generosity. Outside, the first reporters of morning lifted their cameras. The guards' radios crackled awake. A rooster in a distant yard practiced authority. The fountain cleared its throat. And somewhere across the city, Miriam sealed an envelope with a letter that would break a heart cleanly, because sometimes mercy is shaped like leaving. The sun rose, bright as an interrogation light. The gates began to move. The gates creaked open, and Lamina gasped. Reporters leaned forward, cameras blinking, expecting the billionaire's shame. Instead, a flood of humanity streamed inside. Mothers with infants strapped to their backs, barefoot children clutching raffia baskets, old men leaning on canes, the flood victims from the riverbank slums. Guards carried bundles of mats. Caterers wheeled steaming pots of jollof rice and beans. Volunteers tied headscarves and ladled food into bowls. Richard walked among them, not in a tuxedo or suit but in rolled sleeves and plain trousers, his wristwatch catching the sun. He carried crates, lifted children onto benches, wiped sweat with the back of his arm. The mansion that once glowed with chandeliers now echoed with laughter, cries, and clattering spoons. The marble, once sterile, was scattered with mats where families rested. Journalists meant to humiliate him found themselves recording generosity too radiant to be twisted. And then, like a whisper that becomes thunder, Miriam appeared. She had readied herself to leave forever, letter folded in her bag. Yet when she saw the gates wide and the needy gathered, she walked in quietly. Her scarf clung to her hair, her wrapper simple. She bent low to tie a child's shoelace, ladled rice with steady hands, pressed a palm to an old woman's shoulder. Cameras caught her not posing, not performing, but serving. The narrative shifted in real time. Is this the maid? The so-called gold digger? Her dignity silenced more critics than Richard's empire ever could. Later that week, the family council gathered again. Smoke from firewood curled into the air. Elders leaned in with eyes sharp. Richard stood tall before them. The shine fades, he said, voice carrying the weight of storms, but a good foundation holds the roof. If you reject Miriam, then you reject me. He turned, leaving the kola nut untouched once more. Some elders scoffed. Others, quieter, remembered the proverb in their bones. Diana's empire of lies soon cracked. Richard's lawyers unveiled proof of her collusion with rivals. Emails sharp as daggers, contracts inked in secret. Sponsors dropped her, her lawsuits withered. Sophia, once Lumina's goddess, was abandoned by friends and brands alike, her tears no longer trending. Their names shrank into footnotes while Richard and Miriam's story grew. The proposal was not in a hall of chandeliers, but at the orphanage Miriam had once saved. Walls still peeled, but children's voices sang. Richard stood beside her, no diamond in his hand, only a promise in his voice. Let's build together from here. Miriam wept, lilies trembling in her grasp. Years later, the mansion was reborn, not as a palace but as a community hub. Its halls rang with literacy classes, its gardens with children's games, its dining table with neighbors' laughter. Coral beads gleamed at weddings held there, talking drums shook the walls, and women once hidden found a roof to thrive under. At that long wooden table, Richard sat with Miriam and their daughter, sharing food with neighbors, laughter spilling like light through the windows. The empire he once measured in skyscrapers now lived in stories, kindness, and legacy. The black credit card lay forgotten in a drawer. The daisies Miriam once dared to buy had become a garden that grew beside the fountain. The mansion had ceased to be cold glass. It had become a foundation. And so Lamina City remembered. Compassion outlives wealth, pride builds towers of glass, but humility builds homes that stand. Would you still choose love if the world mocked you for it? If this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. A brand new tale is coming soon, full of twists and emotions you will never forget. Until then, thank you for watching, and we look forward to seeing you in the next story.